is Aaron Blade, and I am the editor, creator, and producer of what you're watching right now, Blade Talk. If you found this presentation helpful, informative, do me a huge favor and hit that like button. Do me an even greater favor and subscribe to my channel. I always appreciate all the support that I am given. So in today's presentation, I want to go over 5 major Jewish revolts that changed Jewish history. It's a common misconception that Jews rely on other people to fight our battles, when in actuality, in every major crisis that the Jewish people have faced throughout our history, we fought them ourselves. So in today's presentation, again, I'm going to go over 5 Jewish rebellions that altered Jewish life. If you're interested, let's hit that intro and let's begin. Alright, so again, we're looking at 5 times that the Jewish people rebelled. Now, there's no question that in the past 2,500 years, Jews have had it pretty rough. Expulsions, forced conversions, genocide. But oppression isn't the whole story. The Jewish people have survived this long in part due to our resistance to the powers that be. We have decimated Roman legions, confronted the Catholic Church, and rained Molotov cocktails on the Nazis. The point that I'm trying to make is that we didn't go through our hardships willingly. Let's look at 5 times the Jewish people rebelled that forever shaped our history. Number 1. Macban Revolts, aka Hanukkah. So the Seleucid Empire rolled into Jerusalem in the 4th century BCE. Now, the Seleucids were a spin-off of the Greek Empire, also called Hellenism. They were all about togas and pork and Zeus with his multitude of gods, and of course, idol worship. Lots of idols. There are 2 different accounts of what happened next. Version 1 is these foreign Seleucid rulers started banning Jewish practices and forcing idol worship in the temple. One family of priests, known as the Maccabees, couldn't let that stand. They called on their fellow Jews to arm themselves and drive the Greeks from their home. Somehow this tiny militia took down an empire's army and restored the temple to its former Jewish glory. That, of course, is the story of Hanukkah. Now, the second version of that story is a little bit more complicated. So at that time, the rebellion of Jews had already been living under Hellenistic rule for 150 years, which meant that some Jews had already adopted some of the pagan practices. Of course, this was a huge no-no for traditional Jews. By some accounts, it wasn't the Seleucids that brought idol worship into the temple. It was the Hellenized Jews waging a war on traditional Judaism, which meant that the Maccabees, who refused to give up their faith, fought their fellow Jews. These Hellenized Jews called in the Seleucids for backup, pitting the Jewish rebels against the Seleucid Empire, turning a civil war into a full-blown rebellion. It is already tough fighting our enemy, but it reaches a new level when we have to fight our own people that have assimilated. And we see traces of that even occurring now with the constant infighting from Jew to Jew. Right? You have some Jews that don't acknowledge other Jews. You have some Jews that strip other Jews of their identity because they may not like the way that they're practicing Judaism, etc., etc. The worst war is when you're fighting against your own. It's one thing to fight an enemy, but it's another to fight your own people. Again, that was the story of Hanukkah. Number 2, the Roman Revolts. So after the Maccabean Revolt, the Jews remained autonomous for about 100 years until the Romans came to town. They looted the temple, imposed economic hardships that pushed the Jewish community to the brink. Worst of all, they put statues of pagan gods in the temple, insulting not only the Jewish people, but God. Ancient Israel geared up for another Maccabean-style showdown. On one side, you had Jewish zealots who believed that cooperating with Rome was treason. On the other side were the Romans and Jews who accepted the status quo. You've always had Jews that just wanted to accept the way things were. They didn't want to push back. And perhaps this is from a trauma that every time Jews pushed back, things got worse. The tensions tore the Jewish community apart. Over the course of 70 years, the Jews fought 3 wars against the Romans. The fight continued even after the Romans raided Jerusalem, destroyed the Holy Temple, and forced Jews into exile. After 62 years, after the destruction of Jerusalem, a charismatic warrior named Shimon Bar Kokhba reignited the flames of rebellion. His militia gave the Romans hell, wiping out entire legions of the Roman army. For a short time, it seemed as though the revolt had restored Jewish autonomy in the land, and perhaps even ushered the Messianic era. This didn't last long, though. The Romans refused to let a tiny Jewish rebellion destabilize their entire empire. They came back with 100,000 Roman soldiers and mercilessly crushed the rebellion. The Jewish death toll was so high that some historians refer to it as a genocide. Number 3, the Crypto Jews. Now we arrive in the 14th century in the Iberian Peninsula. The Jews had it bad. Those who weren't massacred outright were subject to increasingly oppressive laws. It barred them from public office and professions, told them what they could wear, where they could live, put limits on religious expression, and strongly encouraged conversion. The Jewish people at that time decided to fight back. Without a military or institutional power, they decided to rebel in a different way, a spiritual rebellion. Beginning in 1391, waves upon waves of forced conversion swept the Iberian Peninsula. Some Jews resisted, stubbornly remaining openly Jewish despite the misery of their lives. Others converted, while some of these converts became essentially full-blown Catholics. Others took their Judaism underground and became known as Crypto Jews. So on Shabbat, on Friday evening, the women would secretly light candles. Then Shabbat during the day, the men would privately pray. Sunday morning, they would all go to church like good Catholics. Now, make no mistake, these Jewish acts were dangerous acts of rebellion. There was another spiritual rebellion, but this time it was internal. Number 4, the Htic Revolution. For hundreds of years, the countries known as Poland and Lithuania were among the most tolerant in Europe. By the 17th and 18th centuries, Jews benefited from significant communal and religious autonomy. The Jewish community was dominated by the scholarly elite who believed that the primary path to connecting to God was through intense Torah study at the highest level. This left some common Jews feeling excluded and resentful. Some of these common Jews refused to accept the authority of the rabbinic elites, even going so far as to accuse them of being puppets of the Christian nobility. Here came another Jewish revolution, with the leader being Rabbi Israel ben Eliezer, but you may know him as the Baal Shem Tov. He was a mystic and miracle worker. He taught that anyone could obtain the highest levels of spiritual transcendence, whether a Torah scholar or a common worker. He stressed the importance of connecting to God through the physical world that we live in. For example, eating and showing gratitude was a way of connecting to God. Praying and meditating was a way of connecting to God. Even having sex and pleasing your partner was a way of pleasing God. The Baal Shem Tov came to be known as Hasidim, or pious ones. The scholarly elites reviled this Judaism for the common man. Anti-Hasidim banned Hasidic teachers, burned their books, and even trumped up espionage charges to get a Hasidic leader imprisoned by the government. But it was too late. The Jewish world would never be the same. Most of the movements have already adopted the Hasidic values, including the emphasis on appreciating the physical world. These values put an emphasis on the next Jewish revolt, but this time it would end in tragedy. Number 5, the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. Now, unfortunately, Poland didn't remain a Jewish refuge. Through the 19th and 20th centuries, Polish anti-Semitism made Jewish life a living hell, and then the Nazis invaded in 1939. A year later, German authorities created the Warsaw Ghetto, putting a couple million Jews in an area the size of Manhattan Central Park, where they lived in terrible conditions until they were sent to death camps. After a massive deportation to concentration camps, some Jews weren't going without a fight. They built bunkers and even instituted military-style training. On the first night of Passover, 1943, the Nazis entered the ghetto to liquidate its final inhabitants. They walked right into an ambush. The rebels rained gunfire, grenades, and Molotov cocktails, stopping the advance in its tracks. Miraculously, these sick and starving Jews kept the revolt going for 3 weeks. Now, they knew they couldn't beat the German army, but they fought so they could live for just a little bit longer, defying the Nazis' plan to murder every single Jew. The point that I make with this presentation is that Jews didn't go down without a fight. And in many cases, we didn't go down at all because we're still here. Jewish rebellions continue to this day simply as existing as proud Jews, even when some of the world wants to see us wiped off the planet. Whether they want us gone or want us to convert to their specific religion, we have rebelled and stated no. So whether you are fighting for the Jewish state, turning off your phone on Shabbat, proudly wearing the Jewish star, or a yarmulke, you are telling the world that we are here to stay, the same as we've done for the past 3,000 years. So, if you found this presentation helpful and informative, do me a huge favor and hit that like button. Do me an even greater favor and subscribe to my channel. I always appreciate all the support that I am given. Thank you all so much for tuning in to Blade Talk. Be good to yourselves, be good to others, and until next Sunday, you all take care. Shavua Tov.